I stood there in the living room, my hands stuffed into my pockets, trying to keep my breathing steady as Marjorie Whitmore, my mother-in-law, screamed at me with all the venom she could muster. "Get out. This is my daughter's house," she bellowed, her voice bouncing off the walls like a gunshot in a quiet night. Her finger jabbed toward the front door, trembling with fury, her eyes wild and wide like she'd finally won some battle she'd been fighting in her head for years. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell back. I just looked over at Clarissa, my wife, sitting there on the couch with her arms crossed, her face blank like she didn't even hear the chaos erupting around us. I waited for her to say something. Anything. To back me up, to tell her mom to calm down, to remind her that I wasn't some intruder. But she didn't. She just shrugged, a tiny little lift of her shoulders, like this whole thing wasn't worth her energy. That shrug hit me harder than Marjorie's shouting ever could. It told me everything I needed to know. I was on my own here. So I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or try to reason with either of them. What was the point? Marjorie's face was red, her chest heaving, and Clarissa wouldn't even meet my eyes. I turned around, walked to the bedroom, and pulled my old black duffel bag from the closet. It didn't take long to pack: some clothes, my toothbrush, a couple of books I'd been reading. I moved slow, deliberate, letting the quiet of my actions sink into the air. Marjorie followed me to the doorway, her arms folded tight, smirking like she'd just checkmated me in some game I didn't even know we were playing. "You heard me," she said, her voice lower now, but still sharp. "Out." I zipped the bag shut, slung it over my shoulder, and grabbed my keys from the nightstand. As I walked past her, I caught that smug little grin on her face, and I almost laughed. Almost. She thought she'd won. Clarissa thought she'd won too, I guess, sitting there silently letting her mom take the lead. They had no idea what was coming. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the door clicking shut behind me, and took a deep breath. The street was quiet, just the hum of a neighbor's sprinkler a few houses down and the faint glow of streetlights flickering on. I tossed my bag into the back seat of my truck and climbed in, letting the engine rumble to life. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and for a moment, I just sat there, staring at the house I'd spent years building into something solid, something ours. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was late nights fixing leaks, weekends painting rooms, mornings drinking coffee on the porch with Clarissa before life got complicated. And now Marjorie was in there, strutting around like she owned it, and Clarissa was letting her. I could have stormed back in. I could have shouted my own piece, demanded respect, fought for my place. But I didn't. I shifted the truck into gear and pulled away, the headlights cutting through the dusk as I headed down the road. They thought I was leaving because I had no choice. They thought I was beaten, some weak man who'd just roll over and take it. That's what Marjorie's smirk told me, what Clarissa's silence screamed louder than words. But as I drove, a calm settled over me, not the kind that comes from giving up, but the kind that comes from knowing something they didn't. This wasn't their victory. It was their mistake. I'd spent years preparing for something like this, even if I hadn't known it at the time. Every document signed, every dollar tracked, every quiet move I'd made, it was all about to pay off. Marjorie could yell all she wanted, and Clarissa could sit there shrugging like none of it mattered. They just handed me the perfect opening, and I wasn't worried. Not even a little. 2 weeks from now, they'd see why. For now, I just drove, the hum of the engine steady in my ears, my mind already turning over the next step. They'd played themselves, and I was ready to let them figure that out the hard way. The hotel I picked wasn't far, just a simple place downtown with clean sheets and a decent Wi-Fi signal. I checked in under a fake name, John Smith, not because I was running from anything, but because I didn't want anyone sniffing around just yet. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me the keycard, and I liked it that way. Up in the room, I dropped my bag on the bed and pulled out my laptop. The screen glowed to life, and I logged into the secure server I'd set up years ago, back when I first started working with Uncle Warren. Folders popped up, neat and organized. Property deeds, trust agreements, bank statements, even a few audio files I'd recorded over the years, just in case. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen, and let a small smile tug at my lips. Marjorie thought that house was Clarissa's. Clarissa probably thought so too. They were wrong. It was mine, legally, quietly, undeniably mine. And they'd just given me every reason to prove it. I clicked open the trust document first, scanning the lines I'd memorized long ago. It was airtight, set up to protect what I'd built. not just handed over to anyone who happened to share my last name. Marjorie's outburst wasn't just rude, it was a breach. Clarissa's silence was consent. Together, they crossed a line they didn't even know existed. I closed the laptop and leaned my head back, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner. The room was small, plain, nothing like the house I'd left behind, but it felt good. Peaceful. I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't panicking. I had everything I needed right here, and they had no clue what was coming. 2 weeks. That's all it would take. 2 weeks, and they'd be the ones standing outside, wondering how it all fell apart. For now, I'd let them enjoy their little win. It wouldn't last. I pulled into the parking lot of the downtown hotel, a modest brick building with a flickering neon sign that read Traveler's Rest. It wasn't fancy, no marble floors or bellhops waiting to grab your bags, but it was clean, quiet, and exactly what I needed right now. I turned off the truck's engine and sat there for a minute, letting the silence settle around me. The night was dark, the kind of dark that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath, and I could still hear Marjorie's voice ringing in my ears, "Get out. This is my daughter's house." Like some broken record, I couldn't shut off. But I wasn't mad. Not anymore. I was calm, focused, already shifting gears in my head. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and stepped out, the cool air brushing against my face as I locked the truck and headed inside. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener, and the guy behind the counter barely glanced up from his phone as I approached. "Checking in," I said, sliding my ID across the desk. Except it wasn't my real ID. It was a spare I kept in my wallet, one with the name John Smith printed in crisp black letters. I wasn't hiding from the law or anything dramatic like that. I just didn't want Clarissa or Marjorie tracking me down too quick. Not yet. The clerk grunted, tapped a few keys on his computer, and handed me a keycard. Room 214. Up the stairs, second floor. I nodded, took the card, and headed up, my boots thudding softly on the worn carpet. The room was small when I got there. A single bed with a stiff mattress, a desk that wobbled if you leaned on it, and a window with a view of the parking lot. It wasn't home, but it'd do. I dropped my bag on the bed and unzipped it, pulling out my laptop and a bottle of water I'd grabbed from the gas station on the way. The bag still had that faint smell of leather and laundry detergent, a little piece of normal in this upside-down night. I set the laptop on the desk, plugged it in, and powered it up. The screen flickered to life, and I typed in my password, something long and random I'd memorized years ago. This wasn't some casual setup. This was my lifeline, my backup plan, my quiet little fortress. I'd learned early on, working with Uncle Warren, that you don't leave things to chance. You don't trust people to do the right thing just because they're family. You prepare. And I'd been preparing for years without even knowing it had come to this. I logged into the secure server, the one I'd paid a guy in IT to set up back when I first started making real money. It was my vault. Everything I'd ever need to protect what was mine, all tucked away behind layers of encryption. The folders loaded up, each one labeled clean and simple. Property, trust, finances, recordings. I clicked on trust first, and there it was, the document that'd change everything. 5 years ago, when Clarissa and I bought the house, I didn't just slap my name on a mortgage like some fool. I set up a trust, a legal shield Uncle Warren had insisted on. Keeps things tidy, he'd said, puffing on his cigar. Keeps people honest. The house wasn't in Clarissa's name, not really. It was owned by the trust, and I was the trustee. The sole trustee. Clarissa was a beneficiary, sure, but only if I said so. And I hadn't said so yet. I leaned back in the chair, the cheap wood creaking under my weight, and took a sip of water. The room was quiet except for the hum of the laptop fan, and my mind started piecing things together. Marjorie thought she could kick me out because she saw me as some outsider, some guy who'd married into her precious Whitmore family and didn't belong. Clarissa let it happen because, well, I don't know why. Maybe she was tired of fighting her mom. Maybe she didn't care enough to fight for me. Either way, they'd misread the board. That house wasn't theirs to claim. It was mine, legally locked down in black and white, and I had the paperwork to prove it. I scrolled through the trust document, double-checking the clauses. Everything was there, my name, my rights, my control. They could scream all they wanted, but the law didn't care about volume. I closed the trust folder and opened property. There were the deeds, the payment records, the tax filings, all in my name or tied to the trust. I'd paid for that house, every dime of it, while Clarissa picked out curtains and Marjorie dropped by to complain about the neighbors. They'd lived in it, sure, but I'd built it. I'd made it real. And now they thought they could just shove me out the door like I was some tenant who'd overstayed his welcome? I almost laughed, the sound catching in my throat as I stared at the screen. They had no idea what they'd started. I shut the laptop and rubbed my eyes, the weight of the day finally settling into my shoulders. It had been a long one, Marjorie's tantrum, Clarissa's silence, the drive across town. But I wasn't worried. I wasn't scrambling. I had a plan forming, quiet and steady, like a train picking up speed. Step 1 was already done. I was out of the house, safe in this little hotel room, with all my cards still in my hand. Step 2 would come tomorrow, when I'd start pulling strings they didn't even know existed. For now, I kicked off my boots, stretched out on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was hard, the pillow thin, but I didn't care. I felt good. Better than I had in months, maybe years. They thought they'd won when I walked out that door, but they were wrong. I wasn't running. I was regrouping. And soon enough, they'd see what that really meant. I woke up early, the hotel room still dark except for a thin sliver of gray light sneaking through the gap in the curtains. The clock on the nightstand blinked 5:47 a.m., and I lay there for a minute, listening to the faint hum of traffic starting up outside. Sleep hadn't come easy, you. My mind kept churning over last night, Marjorie's yelling, Clarissa's blank stare, the way I'd walked out without a fight. But I wasn't restless. I was ready. I rolled out of bed, splashed cold water on my face in the tiny bathroom, and pulled on a clean shirt from my bag. The plan was already taking shape in my head, and it started with a call I'd been putting off for too long. I needed to talk to Uncle Warren. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to his number, hesitating just a second before hitting call. It rang twice before his gruff voice crackled through the line. Well, hell, boy, you're up before the roosters. What's going on? I could picture him clear as day, sitting in his old leather chair, a mug of black coffee in one hand, his gray hair sticking out like he'd just rolled out of bed himself. Uncle Warren wasn't my real uncle, not by blood, but he'd been my dad's best friend growing up, and after Dad passed, he'd taken me under his wing. He was a lawyer, a tough old guy who'd seen action in the army before settling down to argue cases and smoke cigars. I trusted him more than anyone. Hey, Warren, I said, keeping my voice steady. Got a situation. Marjorie kicked me out last night. Said the house is Clarissa's. Clarissa didn't argue. There was a long pause, then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. Whitmore family nonsense, huh? Told you that bunch was trouble. He wasn't wrong. 5 years ago, when Clarissa and I got engaged, he'd pulled me aside at his office, a cramped little place downtown with stacks of files and a faint smell of tobacco. If you marry into the Whitmores, he'd said, pointing a thick finger at me, prepare for war disguised as brunch. They're all smiles and casseroles till they smell money or weakness. Then it's knives out. I'd laughed it off back then, thinking I could handle it. Clarissa was sweet, easygoing, nothing like her mom. I figured Marjorie was just loud, not dangerous. But Warren had seen it coming. He'd insisted on the trust for the house, made me sign papers I didn't even fully understand at the time. Keeps you in control, he'd said. Keeps them honest. Turns out, he'd been right all along. She thinks she's won, I told him now, pacing the small room. Marjorie's strutting around like she owns the place. Clarissa's just letting her. Warren snorted. And you? What are you doing, sitting in some motel feeling sorry for yourself? I grinned, even though he couldn't see it. Nah, I'm at the Traveler's Rest, downtown. Got my laptop, my files. I'm looking at the trust right now. Another pause, then his voice got serious. Good. You kept everything, didn't you? Every receipt, every signature? Yeah, I said. Every damn thing. He let out a satisfied grunt. That's my boy. You've got the upper hand here, you know that? They don't own squat unless you say they do. What's your next move? I stopped pacing and leaned against the desk, glancing at my laptop screen where the trust document still glowed. I'm thinking I let them dig a little deeper first. Marjorie's probably already planning to repaint the walls or something stupid. Then I hit them with the legal stuff. Warren laughed again, louder this time. Smart. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. You've got grounds now. Her kicking you out's a breach. Emotional distress, interference, whatever you want to call it. You've got the trust, the deeds, the proof. They've got nothing but hot air. I nodded to myself, feeling that calm settle over me again. Yeah, I just need to time it right. You will, he said. You're steady. That's your strength. They're loud, but you're smart. Call me when you're ready to file. I'll dust off my suit and scare the hell out of him in court if it comes to that. We talked a bit more, logistics, details, a few old stories about Dad to lighten the mood. Then I hung up, promising to keep him posted. I set the phone down and opened my laptop again, pulling up the trust folder. Warren's warning from years ago echoed in my head, war disguised as brunch. He'd seen Marjorie's type before, people who think they can bully their way into anything, who assume the world bends to their tantrums. I thought I could manage it, keep the peace, love Clarissa enough to make it work. But I'd been wrong. She wasn't fighting her mom anymore, she was siding with her, or at least stepping out of the way. And that hurt, sure, but it also cleared things up. This wasn't about love or family now. It was about what was mine. I clicked through the files, double-checking everything. The trust was solid. My name as trustee, Clarissa as a beneficiary I could remove if I needed to. The house payments, the taxes, the insurance, all tied to me or the trust. I'd kept receipts too, digital scans of every bill, every repair. Every time I'd shelled out cash to keep that place running while Marjorie sipped wine and complained about the neighbors. It was all there, a quiet mountain of evidence. I wasn't some freeloader they could toss out. I was the foundation they'd built their lives on, and they didn't even know it. I closed the laptop and grabbed my keys. I needed coffee, something hot to shake off the early morning chill. As I headed out, locking the door behind me, I felt lighter. Warren's words stuck with me. You've got the upper hand. He was right. Marjorie's outburst wasn't just a fit. It was a mistake, a legal opening I could use. I didn't have to yell or storm back in there. I just had to wait, watch, and pull the right lever when the time came. They thought I'd left because I was weak. They were wrong. I'd left because I was ready. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, my phone in my hand, staring at Clarissa's name on the screen. The room was quiet, just the faint hum of the heater kicking on and off, and the morning light was starting to creep through the curtains. It had been less than 12 hours since I walked out, since Marjorie screamed me out the door and Clarissa just sat there, but it felt like longer. My thumb hovered over the call button, then slid to the messages instead. I typed slow, keeping it simple. You really think that was your mom's call to make? I hit send and watched the little blue bubble pop up, sitting there alone with no reply. I didn't expect one, not really, but I'd hoped. Hoped she'd say something. Anything. To show she cared. To show she hadn't just checked out of us completely. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. I tossed the phone onto the bed and rubbed my face with both hands. Her silence was louder than Marjorie's shouting ever could be. I got up and started pacing the small room, my socks scuffing against the thin carpet. That shrug she'd given me last night kept replaying in my head, her shoulders barely moving, her eyes fixed on the floor like I wasn't even worth looking at. We'd been married 6 years. Built a life together, or at least I thought we had. I'd spent nights fixing the leaky sink she hated, mornings making her coffee just the way she liked it, weekends driving her to those fancy brunches with her friends. And now? Now she couldn't even open her mouth to tell her mom to back off. I stopped by the window and pushed the curtain aside, staring out at the parking lot. A couple of cars rolled in, headlights cutting through the dawn, but my mind was still in that living room, stuck on her sitting there like a statue, while Marjorie tore into me. My phone buzzed, and I turned fast, grabbing it off the bed. But it wasn't Clarissa. It was Silas, her cousin, the one guy in the Whitmore family who didn't bow down to Marjorie's every word. Hey man, his text read. You okay? Heard what happened? I typed back quick. Yeah, I'm fine. What's going on there? His reply came in seconds. Marjorie's redecorating already. Talking about a wine cellar and kicking down your office wall. I stared at the words, letting them sink in, and a slow burn started in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but something close. My office. The one room in that house I'd made mine, with the desk I'd built myself and the shelves full of books I'd collected over years. She was going to tear it down for a wine cellar? I set the phone down and took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This was good. This was perfect, actually. Every move she made was another mistake. Another piece I could use. I grabbed my laptop and flipped it open, pulling up the trust files again. Silas's text was gold, proof Marjorie wasn't just kicking me out. She was already acting like the house was hers to mess with. I started a new document, typing out what he'd said, timestamping it with the date and time. I'd learned from Uncle Warren years ago, keep records. Always. You never know when you'll need to show your hand, he'd told me, and I listened. I shot Silas a quick reply. Thanks for the heads up. Keep me posted if she does anything else. He texted back a thumbs up, and I leaned back in the chair, thinking. Silas didn't like Marjorie much, never had. She tried bossing him around too, but he was too stubborn to bend. Maybe he'd be an ally in this, or at least a pair of eyes on the inside. Clarissa still hadn't answered. I picked up the phone again, staring at my message sitting there unanswered, and the burn in my chest flared hotter. Why couldn't she just say something? Even if it was, "I'm sorry," or "Mom was wrong," I'd take it. Anything but this nothing. We'd had fights before. Sure, every couple does, but this felt different. This wasn't a disagreement about bills or where to spend Christmas. This was her letting her mom shove me out of our life, out of our home, without so much as a word. I thought back to the early days, when we'd laugh over stupid stuff, when she'd lean against me on the couch and tell me about her day. Where'd that Clarissa go? When did she decide I wasn't worth fighting for? I set the phone down and went back to the laptop, pulling up the property records. Every payment, every signature, mine. The house wasn't some gift Marjorie had handed down to Clarissa like she probably thought. I'd bought it, set up the trust, made it ours. And now Marjorie was in there, planning renovations like she owned the deed. Let her. Every hammer swing, every dollar she spent, was just more rope for her to hang herself with. Clarissa too, if she kept going along with it. I didn't want it to come to that. I didn't want to drag her down with her mom, but she wasn't giving me much choice. Her silence was picking a side, whether she meant it to or not. I closed the laptop and stood up, stretching my arms over my head. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in a little, but I shook it off. I needed to get out, grab some air, clear my head. I pulled on my jacket and headed for the door, my phone buzzing again as I stepped into the hall. Another text from Silas. She's calling a contractor tomorrow. Wants it done fast. I smirked, locking the door behind me. Good. Keep digging, Marjorie. Clarissa might not talk to me, but her mom's big mouth was doing all the work I needed. I headed down the stairs, the plan clicking into place. They thought I was gone for good. They were wrong. I was just getting started. I sat at the wobbly hotel desk, a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee cooling in my hand, the laptop open in front of me. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but I didn't mind. It was my war room now. Silas's last text about Marjorie calling a contractor had lit a fire under me. She wasn't just talking big. She was moving fast, trying to remake the house into her own little kingdom before I could even catch my breath. That was fine. Let her swing the hammer. I'd make sure it landed on her own foot. I took a sip of the coffee, bitter and weak, and set it down, cracking my knuckles as I pulled up my email. It was time to set the trap, and I wasn't doing it alone. First, I called Uncle Warren. The phone rang once before he picked up, his voice rough like he'd just woken up from a nap. "What's the word, kid?" he asked, and I could hear the creak of his chair in the background. "Marjorie's bringing in a contractor," I said, keeping it short. "Wants to tear down my office, put in a wine cellar." Silas tipped me off. Warren let out a low whistle. "She's got guts, I'll give her that. Stupid, but gutsy. You ready to move?" "Yeah," I said. "I want to freeze everything, the trust, the accounts, all of it. Hit them before they dig too deep." He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Smart boy. I'll draft the injunction. You call Leah yet?" Leah Moreno, my old friend from college, now a real estate attorney with a knack for making people sweat in court. "Not yet," I admitted. "Doing it now." "Good," Warren said. "Get her on board. We'll box him in tight." I hung up and dialed Leah next, leaning back in the chair as the line rang. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and sharp. "Hey, stranger. What's up?" I grinned despite myself. Leah always had a way of cutting through the gloom. "Hey, Leah. Got a mess on my hands. Need your help." I laid it out quick. Marjorie's outburst, Clarissa's silence, the contractor coming to rip apart my house. She listened, quiet at first, then let out a low oof when I finished. "They're bold, I'll give him that," she said. "You've got the trust, though, right? You're the trustee." "Yeah," I said, glancing at the laptop screen where the document sat open. "All mine. Clarissa's just a beneficiary, and Marjorie's got no claim at all." Leah laughed, sharp and quick. "Oh, this is going to be fun. I can file an injunction today, freeze the trust assets, stop any work on the property. You want to cut off the money too?" I thought about it for a second, picturing Marjorie's face when her credit card got declined at the hardware store. "Yeah," I said. "All of it. Home equity line, utilities, everything." "Done," she said. "Send me the docs, and I'll get it rolling. You're playing this smart, you know that." I thanked her, hung up, and emailed her the trust files, the property deeds, everything I'd been hoarding on my server. It felt good, like loading a gun and knowing you've got perfect aim. I wasn't yelling or storming back into the house. I was building a wall they couldn't climb, brick by quiet brick. Marjorie thought she could just take over because she was loud, because Clarissa didn't stop her. But I had something better than noise. I had proof. I had control. And now, with Warren and Leah in my corner, I had the muscle to back it up. I stood up and stretched, my back popping from sitting too long. The coffee was cold now, but I didn't care. I was wide awake, my mind buzzing. I pictured Marjorie strutting around the house, barking orders at some contractor, Clarissa trailing behind her like a shadow. They'd probably already started picking out paint swatches or whatever nonsense Marjorie thought made her look important. Every move they made was a gift to me. Unauthorized changes to a trust-owned property? That was a breach, plain and simple. I didn't even have to lift a finger. They were doing the work for me, piling up evidence I could shove in front of a judge if it came to that. I grabbed my phone and texted Silas. They start anything yet? His reply came fast. Contractor's there now. Measuring the office wall. I smirked, setting the phone down. Perfect. Let them measure. Let them plan. By the time they swung a sledgehammer, Leah's injunction would be filed, and the whole thing would grind to a halt. I sat back down and opened the trust document again, reading through it slow, making sure I hadn't missed anything. It was tight. My name is trustee, Clarissa's rights conditional on my say-so. No mention of Marjorie anywhere. I'd set it up to protect us, back when I thought, us meant me and Clarissa forever. Now it was protecting me from them. The phone buzzed again, Leah this time. Papers are filed, her text read. Injunctions in motion. Trust frozen as of noon. Equity lines cut off too. Utilities next, give it a day. I leaned back, a slow grin spreading across my face. Noon. A few hours from now, Marjorie's little renovation party would hit a brick wall. She'd call the bank, scream at some poor teller, and find out her champagne lifestyle was running on fumes. Clarissa too. They'd been living off my quiet empire, the money I'd earned, the systems I'd built. And now it was locked down, out of their reach. I got up and walked to the window, pushing the curtain aside. The parking lot was filling up now, people dragging suitcases and sipping coffee from to-go cups. I felt steady, like a weight had lifted off my chest. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about taking back what was mine, showing them they couldn't just shove me out and expect me to disappear. Marjorie's trap was set, but I'd flipped it. Now she was the one stepping into it, and Clarissa was following right behind. I'd wait, watch, and let them figure out the hard way that I wasn't the pushover they thought. I was eating a sandwich in the hotel room. Ham and cheese from the gas station down the street, when my phone lit up with a voicemail from Silas. It was 2 weeks to the day since I'd walked out, and I'd been waiting for this moment, knowing it was coming like a storm you can smell in the air before the rain hits. I wiped my hands on a napkin, set the sandwich down, and pressed play. Marjorie's voice exploded through the speaker, shrill and panicked, recorded from somewhere in the house. What do you mean we can't access the house account? What do you mean the house is in his name? I could hear Silas in the background, trying to calm her down, his voice low and steady, but she wasn't having it. This is ridiculous. That's my daughter's house. He can't do this. The message cut off mid-rant, and I leaned back in the chair, a slow smile creeping across my face. The storm had hit, and they were soaked. I played it again, just to hear the crack in her voice, the way her confidence shattered like glass. 2 weeks ago, she'd been smirking at me, pointing at the door like she owned the world. Now she was scrambling, yelling at Silas like he could fix it. I pictured her pacing the living room, her hair a mess, her hands flailing as she tried to make sense of it all. The injunction Leah filed had gone through, trust frozen, equity line cut, utilities on the chopping block next. They'd probably tried to pay the contractor, or maybe order some fancy wine cellar shelves, and found out the card wouldn't swipe. That's when the truth started sinking in. They didn't control a damn thing. My phone buzzed again, this time with Clarissa's name on the screen. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. She hadn't said a word to me since I left. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Now, 2 weeks later, with the walls closing in, she wanted to talk? I let it ring, watching the seconds tick by until it went to voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up, but I didn't listen. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to deal with whatever excuse or plea she'd cooked up. Instead, I texted Leah. Marjorie's freaking out. Silas caught it on tape. Clarissa's calling now. Her reply came fast. Beautiful. Let him stew. Cease and desist is ready, delivering it today. I set the phone down and took a bite of my sandwich, chewing slow. Leah was a shark, and I was glad she was on my side. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back to look at the street below. The hotel wasn't much to look at, but it felt like a fortress now, a safe spot where I could watch everything unfold. 2 weeks ago, I'd left the house with my bag and my keys, calm as could be, because I knew this day was coming. Marjorie thought she'd won when I walked out. She'd practically danced me to the door. Clarissa's silence had been her green light, letting her mom take over like it was all hers to claim. But they didn't know about the trust. They didn't know about the years I'd spent building something solid, something they couldn't touch. Now they were finding out, and it was hitting them hard. I went back to the desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the trust files again. I'd read them 100 times by now, but I wanted to see it in black and white, the trustee line with my name, the beneficiary clause that gave me full say over Clarissa's rights. Marjorie wasn't even mentioned, not a footnote, not a whisper. She'd been living in that house like a queen these past few years, dropping by whenever she felt like it, sipping wine on my dime. She thought it was Clarissa's because she'd raised her, because she'd bullied her way into every corner of our lives. But the law didn't care about her ego. It cared about signatures, and mine was the only one that mattered. The phone buzzed again. Clarissa, calling a second time. I let it ring out again, my jaw tightening. What did she want now? To beg? To explain? 2 weeks of nothing. And now she was blowing up my phone because the money dried up? I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and stared at the blank screen until the voicemail popped up. This time I played it. Her voice came through, soft and shaky, not like the Clarissa I used to know. Hey, it's me. Something's going on with the house stuff. Mom's freaking out, and I don't know what's happening. Can you call me back? Please. She sounded small, lost, like a kid caught in a mess she didn't make. But she'd made it. She'd sat there while Marjorie kicked me out. She'd picked her side, and now she was feeling the squeeze. I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I texted Silas. What's she doing now? His reply came quick, yelling at the bank on the phone. Contractor left, couldn't get paid. I nodded to myself, picturing the chaos. Marjorie probably thought she could scream her way out of this, like she always did. But the bank didn't care about her tantrums, and neither did the trust. Leah's cease and desist would land soon. A legal gut punch telling them to stop everything. Renovations, spending, all of it, or face the consequences. They were squatting now, technically, on property they didn't own. I'd let that sink in for them. I finished my sandwich, the bread dry in my mouth, and washed it down with the last of the coffee. The storm was here, and I was dry while they drowned. Marjorie's freakout was just the start. Clarissa's calls were the next wave. They'd figure out soon enough that I wasn't bluffing, that I'd been ready for this all along. 2 weeks ago, I'd walked out calm because I knew the house was mine. Now they knew it too, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it. I was sipping a coffee at the hotel's little breakfast nook, stale pastries, and a humming vending machine in the corner, when my phone buzzed with a new text from Silas. It's getting ugly, he wrote. Marjorie's HOA buddies are talking. Clarissa's brunch crew ditched her. I set the cup down, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue, and leaned back in the plastic chair. 2 weeks ago, I'd walked out of the house with my bag and my plan, and now it was all unraveling for them, piece by public piece. The injunction had locked everything down, the trust, the money, the house, and Leah's cease and desist had landed like a brick through their window. They weren't just losing the fight, they were losing face, and I could feel it from here. I pictured Marjorie first, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place as she tried to explain to her HOA friends why the bank wouldn't let her pay for anything. Those women loved gossip more than their wine, and she'd been their queen bee, always bragging about Clarissa's perfect life, the house she claimed as her daughter's triumph. Now the whispers were starting. Did you hear? It's not even her house. Her son-in-law owns it. Kicked her out of her own game. She'd hate that more than anything, the way they'd smile to her face and shred her behind her back. Then there was Clarissa, her ladies who brunch club was her lifeline. Those fancy women with their designer bags and fake laughs. Silas said they'd iced her out, probably after word got around that the house was in limbo, that her mom's big renovation plans had crashed. They didn't like messy, and this was a mess. My phone buzzed again, this time with Clarissa's name. Another call. I'd ignored her last two, but something made me pick up this time. Maybe it was the coffee kicking in, or maybe I just wanted to hear how far they'd fallen. I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear. Hello? Her voice came through, soft and wobbly, like she'd been crying. "Hey, it's me. Can we talk? Please." I stayed quiet for a second, letting her sweat. The vending machine hummed louder in the background, and I took a slow breath. "Yeah," I said finally. "We can talk. Meet me at the cafe on Elm Street. 1 hour." She sniffled, then whispered, "Okay. Thank you." I hung up without another word, my jaw tight. She sounded broken, but I wasn't sure if it was real or just her playing the part now that the walls were caving in. I texted Leah next. "Clarissa wants to meet. Cafe on Elm. 1 hour. You free?" Her reply was instant. "I'll be there. Won't say a word unless you need me to. Espresso's on you." I grinned a little. Leah was solid. Always had been. She'd sit there like a shadow, sipping her coffee, ready to jump in if things got legal. I finished my own coffee, tossed the cup in the trash, and headed back to my room to grab my jacket. The cafe wasn't far, a little place with big windows and decent sandwiches, public enough to keep this civil. I wasn't sure what Clarissa wanted: forgiveness, a deal, a way out, but I'd hear her out. Not because I owed her, but because I wanted to see her face when she realized how deep this hole was. An hour later, I walked into the cafe, the bell above the door jingling as I stepped inside. Leah was already there, tucked into a corner table with her espresso, her dark hair pulled back and her eyes scanning a newspaper like she wasn't watching everything. I gave her a nod and took a seat by the window, ordering a black coffee from the waitress. Clarissa showed up 5 minutes late, her hair messy, her eyes red like she hadn't slept. She slid into the chair across from me, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, keeping my face blank. "Hey." She fidgeted, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "I didn't know it'd get this bad," she started. "Mom's losing it. The bank won't let us do anything, and the city guy came by, something about the renovations not being allowed. My friends won't even talk to me." I leaned back, sipping my coffee, letting her spill it all out. "It's embarrassing," she went on. "Mom thought she could fix it, but now everyone's asking questions, and I don't know what to say." She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading. "Why are you doing this? Why make it so hard?" I set the cup down slow, keeping my voice steady. "Why'd you let her kick me out, Clarissa? Why'd you sit there and say nothing while she threw me out of my own house?" She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't have an answer ready. I didn't think it'd go this far," she stammered. "Mom said it was temporary, that you'd come back." I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. "Temporary? She's tearing down my office for a wine cellar. That's not temporary. And you didn't stop her." She looked down, her hands shaking a little. I didn't know what to do. "She's my mom." "She's your mom," I repeated, leaning forward. "And I'm your husband. Or I was. You picked her over me, and now you're surprised it's falling apart." Her eyes welled up, but I didn't soften. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You never looked at the papers, the trust, the bills I paid. You let her run it all, and now it's public. Your friends, her HOA, the whole damn town knows you don't own that house." "I do." She flinched, like the words hit her square in the chest, and I sat back, letting it sink in. Leah stayed quiet in the corner, her espresso untouched now, her eyes flicking over the newspaper, but missing nothing. Clarissa wiped her face with a napkin, her voice breaking. "Can't we fix this? Please." I shook my head slow. "You broke it, Clarissa. Not me." She didn't say anything after that, just sat there, the weight of her own collapse settling around her. I finished my coffee and stood up, tossing a few bucks on the table. "Think about it," I said, and walked out, Leah falling in step behind me like a silent guard. The storm had hit, and they were sinking in it. I stood outside the cafe, the cool air brushing against my face as Leah caught up with me, her espresso still in hand. She didn't say anything at first, just took a sip and raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to talk. "She's a mess," I said finally, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets. Crying, begging, acting like she didn't see this coming. Leah nodded, her dark eyes steady. "She didn't. They never do till the bill comes due." "You okay?" I shrugged, looking down the street where cars rolled by, their headlights cutting through the late afternoon haze. "Yeah, just tired of it." She smirked a little. "You're doing fine. She's the one drowning. What's next?" I glanced back at the cafe window. Clarissa was still inside, head down, napkin crumpled in her hand. "Next, I show her the truth," I said. "All of it." I'd brought a file with me, a slim folder tucked under my arm, packed with copies of everything: trust docs, payment records, the works. It wasn't the originals. Those were safe on my laptop and with Leah's office. This was for Clarissa, a cold, hard look at what she'd ignored all these years. I'd planned to give it to her if she asked why, if she tried to play dumb like she had in there. She'd asked, "All right, why are you doing this?" And I'd held back, letting her stew first. But now it was time. I nodded to Leah. "I'm going back in. You good to wait?" She waved her cup. "Take your time. I've got caffeine and a front row seat." I turned and walked back inside, the bell jingling again as I stepped through the door. Clarissa looked up, startled, her eyes red and puffy. "You came back," she whispered, like it was some big gesture. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her again. "Not to fix it. To show you something." I slid the folder across the table, the paper scuffing against the wood. "Open it." She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached for it, then flipped it open. The first page was the trust document, my name bolded as trustee, hers listed below as a beneficiary, conditional on my approval. Her eyes scanned it, slow at first, then faster, like she was trying to make it say something else. "What's this?" she asked, her voice small. "The house," I said, leaning back. "It's mine. Always has been. You're in there, sure, but only if I say so. Your mom? She's got nothing." She flipped to the next page. "Bank statements, mortgage payments, all with my name or the trusts, stretching back years. I paid for it," I went on, keeping my tone flat. "Every bill, every repair, every tax dime. You picked curtains." Marjorie drank wine and complained. "But I built it." Her hand shook harder, the papers rustling as she turned to the receipts, plumbing fixes, roof work, the new AC unit I'd installed 2 summers ago. "You never asked," I said. "Never cared where the money came from, long as it was there. Now it's not, and you're wondering why." She looked up at me, tears spilling over again. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "Mom said it was ours, hers and mine." I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, my eyes locked on hers. "She lied. Or she didn't know either, because she never bothered to check. And you let her kick me out of my own house. You sat there, Clarissa, and shrugged while she humiliated me. Why?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face crumpling. "I don't know," she whispered. She's my mom." "I didn't think." "You didn't think," I cut in, sharp but not loud. "That's the problem. You didn't think about me, about us, about what I'd been holding together. You let her take over, and now it's gone." She stared at the papers, her fingers tracing the edges like she could change them by touching them. "I didn't mean for this," she said. "I thought you'd come back, that we'd work it out." I shook my head slow. "You don't get it. This isn't about me coming back. It's about you picking her over me. You lost the right to ask why when you let her throw me out." I tapped the folder. "That's the truth. Not what Marjorie says, not what you assumed. What's real? You ignored it, and now you're living it." She didn't say anything, just sat there, tears dripping onto the table. I watched her for a moment, waiting to feel something, anger, pity, anything. But I didn't. I was done. I'd loved her once, poured everything into us, into that house, into a life I thought we'd share. But she'd checked out long before Marjorie screamed at me. The silence, the shrugs, the way she'd let her mom run everything, it had been building for years, and I'd been too stubborn to see it. Now I did. Now it was clear. I stood up, sliding the folder closer to her. "Keep it," I said. "Read it again if you want. Doesn't change anything." She looked up, her eyes pleading, but I didn't waver. "You made your choice, Clarissa. Live with it." I turned and walked out, the bell jingling one last time as the door swung shut behind me. Leah was waiting outside, her espresso gone now, her arms crossed. "How'd that go?" she asked, falling into step beside me as we headed down the sidewalk. "She's got the file," I said. "Knows the truth now. Didn't like it." Leah nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "They never do. You good?" I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." The truth was out, laid bare on that cafe table. Clarissa could cry all she wanted, but it wouldn't rewrite the papers or the years she'd let slip by. I'd given her the facts, cold, hard, and final, and walked away clean. The house was mine. The life we'd had was gone, and I was ready to move on. I stood in the hotel parking lot, my breath fogging in the crisp morning air, watching as Leah pulled up in her sleek black sedan. She stepped out, a thick envelope in her hand, her coat button-tied against the chill. "Morning," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "It's done. Eviction notice is official. Marjorie's out as of today. Clarissa's got a choice to make. I nodded, taking the envelope from her. It felt heavy, not just from the paper, but from what it meant. A week had passed since the cafe, since I'd laid the truth out for Clarissa and walked away. Now it was time to finish it. Thanks, Leah, I said, tucking the envelope under my arm. You're coming with? She smirked, adjusting her scarf. Wouldn't miss it. Let's go. We drove to the house in my truck, the familiar streets rolling by, past the gas station where I'd grabbed coffee that first night, past the park where Clarissa and I used to walk when things were good. The closer we got, the steadier I felt. This wasn't about anger or revenge anymore. It was about taking back what was mine. Leah had served the eviction notice to Marjorie yesterday, giving her 24 hours to clear out of a property she had no legal right to. Clarissa had been offered a deal, sign over her beneficiary rights to the trust, and she could stay. I didn't think she'd take it, not after the cafe, not after seeing how deep this went, but I'd given her the chance. Now it was up to her. We pulled up to the house, and I parked across the street, cutting the engine. The place looked the same, white siding, green shutters, the porch where I'd built a swing one summer, but it felt different now, like a stranger's home. Marjorie's car was in the driveway, packed with boxes, and I could see her through the open front door, hauling a suitcase out. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her hair a mess. Clarissa stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her mom struggle. No contractors, no delivery trucks, just the two of them, surrounded by stuff they couldn't take fast enough. Leah glanced at me. Ready? I nodded, stepping out of the truck, the envelope in my hand. Marjorie spotted me first, her head snapping up as I crossed the street. You, she shouted, dropping the suitcase with a thud. You've got some nerve showing up here. I didn't flinch, just kept walking, Leah a step behind me. It's my house, Marjorie, I said, calm and even. You're the one who's leaving. She stormed down the steps, her face red, her finger jabbing at me like it had 2 weeks ago. This is my daughter's home. You can't just— I can, I cut in, holding up the envelope. And I did. Eviction notice, signed and legal. You've got no claim here. Never did. She froze, her mouth open, then snatched the envelope from me, ripping it open like she could tear the truth apart. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the fight drain out of her, her hands shaking as she read her name on the order. Clarissa stepped forward then, her voice quiet. You're really doing this? I turned to her, meeting her eyes, red-rimmed but dry now, like she'd cried herself out. Yeah, I said. I gave you an option, Clarissa. Sign over the trust rights, and you could stay. You didn't. She looked down, her arms tightening around herself. I couldn't, she said. It's too much. I nodded slow. Then you're out too. Marjorie spun on her, furious. You're letting him do this? After everything. Clarissa didn't answer, just stared at the ground, and I could see it, the crack between them widening. Marjorie had dragged her into this, and now they were both sinking. I pulled a key from my pocket, the spare I'd kept, and handed it to Leah. Locks are changing today, I said loud enough for them to hear. Movers are coming to clear the rest. Anything you don't take now, it's gone. Marjorie glared at me, her lips trembling, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her suitcase and hauled it to the car, muttering under her breath. Clarissa lingered, looking at me like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just turned and followed her mom, helping load the last boxes. I watched them work, the silence heavy between us, until the car was full. Marjorie climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door, and Clarissa slid in beside her. The engine roared to life, and they pulled out, tires crunching on the gravel as they drove off. Leah and I stood there, watching the car disappear down the street. That's it, she said, handing me the key back. They're gone. I took it, feeling the cold metal in my palm, and nodded. Yeah. The locksmith pulled up a minute later, a skinny guy with a toolbox who got to work without a word. I walked inside as he started, the house quiet now, empty except for a few stray boxes and a coffee mug on the counter. It smelled like Marjorie's perfume still, but that'd fade. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, the one I'd installed myself, and felt a weight lift off my chest. This was mine again, clean, peaceful, no yelling, no shrugs. The movers came next, a crew of 3 guys who hauled out what was left, Marjorie's overstuffed chairs, Clarissa's clothes, all the junk they hadn't grabbed. I directed them, keeping my office intact, the one room Marjorie hadn't touched yet. When they were done, the place was bare, the floors echoing as I walked through. The locksmith finished up, handing me a new set of keys, and Leah clapped me on the shoulder. "You're back in," she said. "Feels good." I looked around, the sunlight streaming through the windows, and nodded. "Yeah, feels right." She left, and I stayed, locking the door behind me. Alone, but not lonely. The house was mine again, and I was home. I woke up in the house for the first time in weeks, the morning light spilling through the bedroom window onto the bare floor. The mattress was on the ground. No frame yet, just the basics. But it felt good, solid, like I'd finally planted my feet again. The quiet was the best part. No Marjorie's shrill voice cutting through the walls. No Clarissa's silence hanging heavy in the air. Just the hum of the fridge I'd plugged back in and the soft creak of the house settling. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and padded to the kitchen, my socks scuffing against the wood I'd sanded myself years ago. The coffee maker was one of the few things I'd brought back last night, and I set it brewing, the smell filling the empty space. This was mine now, all of it, and I could feel the power of that in my bones. I leaned against the counter, watching the coffee drip, and thought about how it had all played out. 2 weeks ago, I'd walked out with my bag and my keys, calm as could be, while Marjorie smirked and Clarissa shrugged. They'd thought they had the upper hand. Her yelling, her claiming the house, them acting like I was some nobody they could toss aside. But they'd been wrong. Power isn't volume, like Marjorie believed. It's not who can scream the loudest or stomp the hardest. It's preparation, patience, the quiet moves you make when no one's looking. I'd learned that from Uncle Warren, from years of keeping receipts and building something they couldn't touch. And now they were gone, out of my house, out of my life, because I'd known something they didn't. The coffee finished, and I poured a mug, taking it to the porch. The swing was still there, swaying a little in the breeze, and I sat on the steps instead, letting the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. The street was waking up, neighbors walking dogs, a kid on a bike zipping by, and it felt normal, peaceful. I thought about Marjorie, how she'd always thrived on noise, on making a scene. That day she kicked me out, she'd been so sure of herself, pointing at the door like she was some big shot. She didn't know about the trust, didn't know I'd set it up to protect what I'd built. She didn't think I'd fight back, not with fists or shouting, but with papers and proof. That's where the real power was, in the quiet lines of a legal document, the ones she'd never bothered to read. Clarissa was the same, in her way. She'd let her mom run the show, assumed the house was hers because that's what Marjorie told her. She didn't ask questions, didn't dig into the details. That shrug she gave me, it wasn't just laziness, it was trust in the wrong person. I'd handed her the truth at the cafe, showed her every dollar I'd paid, every signature that made it mine. She'd cried, said she didn't know, but that didn't change it. She'd picked Marjorie over me, and now she was out there somewhere, probably still reeling from how fast it all fell apart. I didn't feel bad, not anymore. I'd given her a chance to stay, to sign over the trust rights, but she couldn't do it. Maybe she didn't want to admit she'd been wrong, or maybe she was too tied to her mom to break free. Either way, she'd made her bed. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness waking me up, and looked out at the yard. It needed work, grass too long, weeds creeping in, but I'd get to it. This place was a blank slate now, mine to shape. I thought about Silas, how he'd tipped me off about the contractor, how he'd stuck around to watch Marjorie's meltdown. He'd texted me last night. "They're gone. You good?" I'd replied, "Yeah. Thanks, man." He was the only one from her family who'd ever given me a fair shake, and I'd remember that. Maybe I'd call him later, grab a beer, keep that line open. But for now, I was alone, and it felt right. The eviction had been the final blow. Marjorie hauled out, Clarissa following. The locks changed, the movers clearing the last of their mess. I'd stood there with Leah, watching them drive off, and felt the weight lift. It wasn't loud or dramatic, not like Marjorie's tantrums. It was quiet, final, the way real power works. I'd spent years preparing, saving files, paying bills, setting up the trust, not because I'd planned for this fight, but because I'd wanted to build something solid. They tried to take it, thinking I'd just roll over. They didn't know me at all. I finished the coffee and stood up, stretching my arms over my head. The house was empty, but it wouldn't stay that way. I'd bring in what I needed, a bed frame, a couch, some books for the office shelves. I'd keep it simple, make it mine. No more of Marjorie's gaudy chairs or Clarissa's endless throw pillows. Just what I wanted, how I wanted it. I walked back inside, rinsing the mug in the sink, and glanced at my office door. She hadn't touched it, thank God. That was my space, my desk, my books, my quiet. I'd start there today, set it up again, make it the heart of this new start. People like Marjorie think power is about control, about being the loudest in the room. But I'd learned it's about knowing what's yours, knowing how to hold it, knowing when to wait. 2 weeks ago, I'd packed my bag and left, not because I was weak, but because I was ready. I'd known they'd lose, that they'd hand me every reason to take it all back. And they had. Now I was here, coffee in my hand, the house silent around me, and they were out there, figuring out what went wrong. The quiet man wins, I thought, and smiled. They'd never see it coming, but I'd known all along.